I can pinpoint the exact moment when I started to feel like something was off with Lisa, my wife. For the longest time, everything seemed perfect. We'd been married for 10 years, and while we had our ups and downs, nothing ever seemed insurmountable. But then little things began to change, subtle enough to be written off as nothing more than the ebb and flow of life. Yet, as time went on, these small changes started to pile up, and I could no longer ignore the nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach. Lisa worked as an executive assistant for a large corporate firm. Her job was demanding, and for years, she would come home exhausted, crashing on the couch the moment she walked through the door. But lately her energy levels had taken a curious turn. She came home less tired, almost invigorated, which struck me as strange, given the nature of her job. Initially, I was happy for her, thinking maybe she'd found a new routine or some effective way to manage her stress. However, along with this newfound energy came a noticeable distance in our intimacy. Lisa used to be affectionate, initiating sex and expressing her love in various ways. Now she seemed disinterested, often claiming to be too tired or not in the mood. This was the same woman who now came home bursting with energy. The contrast was puzzling and hurtful. I began to question if there was something wrong with me, or if she was going through something she wasn't ready to share. One evening, after another rejection from Lisa, I found myself staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with doubts and fears. I tried to rationalize her behavior. Maybe she was stressed about something at work, or perhaps it was a phase that would pass. But the more I thought about it, the less convinced I became. It wasn't just the lack of sex, it was the little things, like the way she avoided eye contact when I asked about her day, or how she seemed to be texting someone more frequently, often with a slight smile on her face. My best friend Tom noticed my preoccupation one night while we were out for a drink. "You seem off, man. What's going on?" he asked, his brow furrowed with concern. I sighed, taking a long sip of my beer before answering. "It's Lisa. She's been acting strange lately. She's not tired after work anymore, but she is also not interested in, being intimate. And she's been on her phone a lot." Tom nodded, leaning back in his chair. "That does sound weird. Have you talked to her about it?" "I have tried, but she just brushes it off, says she's tired or not feeling well. I don't know, Tom. Something doesn't feel right." He gave me a sympathetic look. "Maybe it's nothing, but if it's bothering you this much, you should try talking to her again. Sometimes it's just about finding the right moment." I nodded, appreciating his advice but feeling no closer to understanding what was happening with Lisa. That night, as I lay in bed next to her, listening to the steady rhythm of her breathing, I resolved to find the right moment to talk to her, to get to the bottom of this growing unease. The following weekend, Lisa mentioned she had to go into work for a few hours on Saturday. This wasn't entirely unusual, but given my recent suspicions, it made my heart sink a little. As she left, I found myself pacing the living room, a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions churning inside me. I decided to use the time to clear my head, maybe go for a jog or catch up on some work. Anything to keep myself from spiraling into paranoia. But then, something caught my eye. Lisa had left her laptop on the dining table, something she rarely did. It felt wrong to invade her privacy, but the need to understand what was happening overpowered my hesitation. With a deep breath, I opened the laptop and navigated to her recent emails and messages. Most of it seemed normal, work-related correspondence, but one email thread stood out. It was between Lisa and her boss, Richard. The messages were innocuous at first, discussing schedules and projects. But as I scrolled further back, I noticed a shift in tone. They were more personal, with inside jokes and references to shared experiences that seemed to go beyond a professional relationship. My heart pounded as I read a particular message from Richard that was more playful, even flirty. Lisa's response was equally casual, but there was an undercurrent of familiarity that made my stomach churn. I closed the laptop, my mind racing. Was I overreacting? Was this just a harmless work friendship, or was there something more? The uncertainty gnawed at me, and I knew I had to confront Lisa. But how? Accusing her outright based on a few emails could backfire spectacularly. When she returned that afternoon, I tried to act normal, but the tension between us was palpable. "How was work?" I asked, forcing a casual tone. "Busy, as always," she replied with a tired smile, pecking me on the cheek. I wanted to ask about Richard, to gauge her reaction, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I just nodded and went back to my book, my mind anything but focused on the pages. The unease had taken root in my mind, growing with every passing day. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off with Lisa. Yet, every time I tried to find concrete evidence or confront her about my suspicions, she managed to calm me down, leaving me questioning my sanity. The Sunday after I found those emails, I decided to take a different approach. Instead of jumping to conclusions, I would try to be more observant, see if there were any other signs that might confirm or dismiss my fears. Lisa and I spent the morning together, sipping coffee on the porch and discussing our plans for the day. She seemed relaxed, even happy, which made me feel guilty for doubting her. That evening, as we settled in to watch a movie, I broached the topic gently. You know, I was thinking about that email thread you had with Richard. You guys seem pretty close. Lisa glanced at me, her expression neutral. Richard? Oh, he's just my boss. We work on a lot of projects together, so we talk a lot. Why do you ask? I shrugged, trying to keep my tone light. No particular reason. Just curious, I guess. She smiled and took my hand. There's nothing to worry about, honey. Richard is happily married, and we're just colleagues. Sometimes work gets stressful, and it's as nice to have someone to joke around with. Her reassurance was comforting, but a part of me still couldn't let go of the doubt. I trust you, I said, squeezing her hand. It's just that you have been working so hard lately. I miss spending time with you. Lisa leaned in and kissed me softly. I know, and I'm sorry. Things have been crazy at work, but it's just a phase. It'll pass, and we'll have more time together soon. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to think that this was just a rough patch and that my fears were unfounded. But over the next few weeks, Lisa started coming home later and later. At first, it was just an extra hour here and there, but soon it became a regular occurrence. She would text me saying she had to stay late to finish a project or attend a last-minute meeting. Each time, she would apologize profusely, promising that it wouldn't be for much longer. One night, as I waited for her to come home, I decided to call Tom again. He'd been my sounding board through all of this, and I needed his perspective. Tom, I don't know what to think anymore. Lisa keeps coming home late, and I can just shake the feeling that something is wrong. Tom listened patiently before responding. I get it, man. It's tough, but maybe she's telling the truth. Work can be demanding, and sometimes things get out of hand. Have you tried talking to her about how you feel? I have, I replied, frustration creeping into my voice. But every time I do, she reassures me that everything's fine. And for a while, I believe her. But then something else happens, and I'm back to square one. Maybe you should try spending more time together, doing something fun. Remind each other why you fell in love in the first place. It was good advice, and I decided to take it. That weekend, I planned a surprise date for Lisa. I made reservations at her favorite restaurant and even arranged for us to spend the night at a cozy bed and breakfast nearby. When I told her about it, she seemed genuinely touched. Oh, wow. That sounds amazing, babe. I've been so caught up with work I didn't even realize how much I needed this. Thank you. The date was perfect. We laughed, talked, and enjoyed each other's company just like we used to. For a brief moment, my worries melted away, replaced by the warmth of our connection. That night, as we lay in bed, Lisa snuggled close to me, and I felt a glimmer of hope. But as the days went by, Lisa's late nights at work resumed, and the doubts crept back in. One particularly late night, I decided to stay up and wait for her. It was nearly midnight when she finally walked through the door, looking exhausted. Hey, she said, dropping her bag on the floor and kicking off her shoes. Sorry I'm so late. We had a major crisis at work, and I had to stay to help sort it out. I forced a smile. It's this okay? I was just worried about you. Lisa walked over and wrapped her arms around me. I appreciate that, but you don't have to worry. I can handle it. Besides, it's all part of the job. I nodded, hugging her back. But as she pulled away and headed to the bedroom, I couldn't help but notice the faint scent of cologne that wasn't mine. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. The next morning, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I started paying closer attention to Lisa's behavior, noting the time she left and returned home, the phone calls she received, and the excuses she made. I even considered hiring a private investigator, but the thought of taking such a drastic step made me feel guilty. One evening, as Lisa was getting ready to leave for work, I mustered the courage to ask her directly, Are you sure everything's okay at work? You've been spending a lot of late nights there. She paused, looking at me with a mixture of surprise and concern. Of course. Why do you ask? I took a deep breath. It's just, I don't know. You've been so distant lately, and I can't help but feel like there's something you're not telling me. Lisa's expression softened, and she walked over to me, taking my hands in hers. I promise you there's nothing going on. Work has been insane, and I know I've been distant, but it's not because of anything else. Just trust me, okay? Her words were sincere, and for a moment I felt a sense of relief. But as she kissed me goodbye and walked out the door, the nagging feeling in my gut remained. Something was wrong, and I couldn't shake the suspicion that Lisa was hiding something from me. The question was, what? As I sat alone in our quiet house, the unease continued to grow, a constant reminder that things were not as they seemed. Little did I know, the truth was closer than I realized, and it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. The gnawing suspicion had become a constant companion, whispering in my ear and tugging at the corners of my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that Lisa was hiding something, but I didn't know what. She continued to reassure me, to calm my fears with her gentle words and warm embraces, but the doubts remained, festering beneath the surface. One evening, when Lisa called to say she would be working late again, I decided I could just sit at home waiting for her. The walls of our house felt like they were closing in on me, the silence amplifying my anxieties. I needed to clear my head, to escape the suffocating grip of my suspicions. So I grabbed my jacket and set out for a walk around the city. The night air was cool and crisp, a welcome contrast to the stifling atmosphere of my thoughts. I wandered aimlessly through the bustling streets, trying to distract myself with the sights and sounds of the city. But no matter how hard I tried, my mind kept drifting back to Lisa and the inexplicable changes in her behavior. As I strolled past a row of restaurants, my attention was caught by a familiar laugh. It was Lisa's laugh, the one that used to fill our home with warmth and joy. My heart skipped a beat, and I turned to see her sitting at a table near the window of a cozy Italian restaurant. My initial relief at seeing her was quickly replaced by a cold knot of dread when I realized she wasn't alone. Richard, her boss, was sitting across from her, leaning in close and speaking animatedly. The two of them seemed completely absorbed in their conversation, oblivious to the world around them. Lisa's face was lit up with a smile I hadn't seen in months, her eyes sparkling with an enthusiasm that had been missing from our interactions. The sight of them together, so at ease and intimate, sent a jolt of pain through my chest. I stood frozen on the sidewalk, unable to tear my eyes away from the scene unfolding before me. It was as if I were watching a movie, a twisted version of my life where everything was wrong. My mind raced with questions and accusations. Why hadn't she told me she was meeting Richard? Why was she out here laughing and enjoying herself, while I was left at home, drowning in doubt and worry? After what felt like an eternity, I forced myself to move, turning away from the restaurant and stumbling down the street. My thoughts were a whirlwind of anger, confusion, and heartbreak. I wanted to burst into the restaurant, to confront Lisa and demand answers. But another part of me was paralyzed by fear, terrified of what I might hear if I did. By the time I returned home, it was late, and the house was dark. I sat in the living room, staring at the clock and waiting for Lisa to come back. My mind replayed the scene at the restaurant over and over, each iteration more painful than the last. I tried to come up with a rational explanation, something that would make sense of what I had seen, but every possibility seemed to lead back to the same devastating conclusion. When Lisa finally walked through the door, I felt a surge of conflicting emotions: relief, anger, betrayal, and love, all tangled together in a knot that threatened to choke me. She greeted me with a tired smile, setting her bag down and kicking off her shoes. "Hey," she said softly, walking over to kiss me on the cheek. "Sorry I'm so late. Work was crazy tonight." I forced a smile, my heart aching at the casual lie. "It's okay. I was just worried about you." She sat down beside me, her hand resting on my knee. "I know, and I appreciate it. But you don't have to worry. I'm fine." The urge to confront her, to tell her what I had seen, was almost overwhelming. But the words caught in my throat, trapped by a mixture of fear and uncertainty. What if I was wrong? What if there was a perfectly innocent explanation, and my accusations only drove a wedge between us? Instead, I just nodded, swallowing the torrent of emotions threatening to spill over. I'm glad to hear that, I said, my voice hollow. I missed you. I missed you too, she replied, leaning her head on my shoulder. Let's get some sleep, okay? We can talk more tomorrow. As we climbed into bed, I felt a crushing sense of isolation. Lisa was right there beside me, but she felt miles away. I lay awake long after she had fallen asleep, my mind a maelstrom of doubt and despair. The image of her with Richard, so happy and carefree, played in my mind like a broken record, each repetition deepening the wound. The next day, I went through the motions of my routine, trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy, but the encounter at the restaurant had shattered any illusion of stability. I found myself constantly second-guessing everything Lisa said and did, searching for hidden meanings and signs of deceit. When I finally had the chance to talk to Tom again, I poured out everything: the late nights, the changes in Lisa's behavior, and the sight of her with Richard. Damn, Tom said, his voice heavy with sympathy. That S rough, man. I don't even know what to say. I don't know what to do, I admitted, my voice breaking. I love her, but I can shake the feeling that she's hiding something from me. And now, after seeing her with Richard, I just don't know. Have you thought about confronting her? Just laying it all out and asking her straight up? I sighed, running a hand through my hair. I want to, but I'm scared. What if she confirms my worst fears? What if she lies again? I don't know if I can handle either outcome. Tom was silent for a moment before speaking again. Look, whatever is going on, you deserve to know the truth. Maybe it's time to stop tiptoeing around and just face it head on. It won't be easy, but living in this constant state of doubt isn't doing you any good either. His words resonated with me, and I knew he was right. I couldn't keep living like this, trapped in a limbo of uncertainty and fear. I needed to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. That evening, I resolved to confront Lisa. I rehearsed what I would say, trying to find the right balance between expressing my concerns and avoiding outright accusations. My heart pounded as I waited for her to come home, each minute stretching into an eternity. When she finally walked through the door, I took a deep breath and braced myself for the conversation that could change everything. Lisa, we need to talk, I said, my voice trembling with a mix of determination and dread. She looked at me, her eyes wide with surprise and concern. Of course, what is it? I swallowed hard, steeling myself for what was to come. I saw you last night, at the restaurant with Richard. Why didn't you tell me you were meeting him? The color drained from her face, and she took a step back, her expression a mix of shock and guilt. I can explain, she stammered, but the cracks in her composure told me all I needed to know. As the truth began to unravel, I realized that my life was about to be upended in ways I could never have imagined, and there was no turning back. Lisa's explanation hung in the air between us, each word a fragile attempt to mend the trust that had been steadily eroding. It was a business meeting, she insisted, her eyes pleading for me to believe her. There were other partners there too. We were discussing a new project, and it ran late. I didn't mention it because I didn't want to worry you over nothing. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to accept her words and push aside the doubts gnawing at my heart. But the image of her with Richard, their intimate smiles and easy laughter, was burned into my mind. It was more than just a business dinner. It was too personal, too comfortable. Why didn't you tell me about it beforehand? I asked, my voice heavy with skepticism. Lisa sighed, running a hand through her hair. I didn't think it was a big deal. It was a last-minute thing, and I didn't want to bother you. I'm sorry if it looked bad, but there's nothing going on between Richard and me. Please, you have to trust me. I nodded, but my heart wasn't in it. The doubts remained, festering beneath the surface. I knew I had no concrete proof, and confronting her further would only drive a deeper wedge between us. So, I let it go, at least on the surface, and resolved to keep a closer eye on things. A few days later, Lisa mentioned a picnic her company was organizing for all the employees and their families. Everyone's bringing their partners, she said, her voice filled with forced cheer. I thought it might be nice if you came along. We could use some time together. I agreed, hoping that spending time with her in a different setting might help clear the air. Maybe seeing her interact with her colleagues would give me some insight, some reassurance that my fears were unfounded. The day of the picnic was bright and sunny, perfect for an outdoor gathering. Lisa and I arrived early, and she introduced me to her co-workers with a smile that seemed genuine. I made an effort to be friendly, to push aside my suspicions and enjoy the day. As more people arrived, I spotted Richard walking towards us, his arm wrapped around the waist of a tall, elegant woman. She had an air of confidence about her, and I realized this must be his wife. "Hey, everyone," Richard called out, his voice warm and jovial. "This is my wife, Sarah." Introductions were made, and we all settled into the rhythm of the picnic. There were games, food, and laughter, but I couldn't shake the tension coiled in my chest. I watched Lisa and Richard interact, looking for any signs that might confirm my worst fears. They were friendly, but nothing overtly inappropriate. Still, I couldn't let go of the nagging doubt. At one point, Lisa and Sarah ended up chatting near the drinks table, while Richard and I found ourselves standing awkwardly nearby. He was engrossed in a conversation with another colleague, so I took the opportunity to talk to Sarah. "Hi, I am Mike," I said, extending my hand. "Lisa's husband." "Nice to meet you, Mike," Sarah replied, shaking my hand with a warm smile. "Richard S. told me a lot about Lisa. She seems lovely." "Yeah, she is," I said, forcing a smile. "So, how long have you and Richard been married?" 10 years, she said, her eyes sparkling with affection. "It's been a wild ride, but I wouldn't trade it for anything." We made small talk for a while, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Sarah deserved to know what I had seen. When Richard and Lisa were occupied with their own conversations, I seized the moment. "Sarah, can I talk to you for a moment?" I asked, lowering my voice. "It asks about Richard and Lisa." Her expression shifted to one of concern. "Sure, what else going on?" I took a deep breath, my heart pounding. "The other night I saw Lisa and Richard at a restaurant. They were alone, and it seemed more than just a business dinner. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but I thought you should know." Sarah's face paled, and she glanced over at Richard, who was laughing with a group of colleagues. "Are you sure?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "I can be certain, but something didn't feel right," I admitted. I didn't know what to do, but I couldn't keep it to myself. She nodded, her jaw tightening. "Thank you for telling me, Mike. I'll handle this." As the day went on, Sarah and I exchanged a few more furtive glances, both of us grappling with the turmoil of our suspicions. I could see the tension in her posture, the way her eyes flicked to Richard whenever he was nearby. The seeds of doubt had been planted, and I knew it was only a matter of time before they took root. A few days later, Sarah called me, her voice filled with a mix of determination and pain. "Mike, I've been thinking about what you said. I confronted Richard, and he denied everything, but I can shake the feeling that he's lying. We need to find out the truth." "What do you suggest?" I asked, my heart pounding with a mixture of dread and anticipation. "Let us work together," she said, her voice firm. "We can keep an eye on them, gather evidence. If they are hiding something, we'll find it." And so an uneasy alliance was formed between us. We shared information, compared notes, and plotted our next steps. It felt strange, almost surreal, to be conspiring with another man's wife against our own spouses. But the betrayal we both sensed demanded action, and together, we were determined to uncover the truth. As the days turned into weeks, our investigation intensified. We followed Lisa and Richard, tracked their movements, and monitored their interactions. Each new piece of information only added to the growing suspicion that they were more than just colleagues. One evening, Sarah called me with a breakthrough. "Mike, I found something," she said, her voice tinged with excitement. "Richard left his phone at home, and I managed to get into his messages. There are texts between him and Lisa, and they are, well, let's just say they are not the kind of messages you'd expect from coworkers." My heart sank as she read some of the messages aloud. They were flirtatious, intimate, filled with inside jokes and references to private meetings. The evidence was damning, and I felt a surge of anger and betrayal. "What's our next move?" I asked, my voice tight with emotion. "We confront them," Sarah replied, her voice resolute. "Together, we'll make them face the truth and deal with the consequences." The plan was simple. Sarah and I would meet at a restaurant to discuss our next steps. It seemed fitting, given that it was at a restaurant where I first saw Lisa and Richard together. We chose a quiet, out-of-the-way place where we could talk without fear of being overheard. When I arrived, Sarah was already there, seated at a corner table. She looked up as I approached, her expression a mix of determination and vulnerability. I sat down, and for a moment we just looked at each other, two people bound by a shared betrayal. "Thanks for coming," she said, her voice steady. "I thought it would be good for us to regroup and figure out our next move." Of course, I replied, nodding. We need to stay on the same page if we're going to get through this. We started with small talk, discussing mundane topics like work and mutual acquaintances. It felt surreal, sitting there with Sarah, knowing the pain and turmoil each of us was enduring. But as the evening wore on, our conversation shifted to more personal matters. We talked about our marriages, our families, and the deep sense of loss we both felt. It is strange, Sarah said, staring into her wine glass. I always thought Richard and I had a solid relationship. Now it feels like everything was a lie. I know what you mean, I replied, my heart aching with empathy. I thought Lisa and I were happy, but now I am questioning everything. It's like our whole life together was built on a foundation of deceit. As we talked, I found myself opening up to Sarah in a way I hadn't with anyone else. There was a comfort in her presence, a shared understanding that made it easy to be honest. She listened with genuine compassion, and I realized how much I appreciated her support. At some point, the conversation turned to our respective second cousins, a topic that seemed safe and removed from the pain we were both feeling. We shared stories and laughed, the tension between us easing with each passing moment. It felt good to laugh, to find a moment of lightness amid the darkness. But as the evening wore on, I began to notice something else, a growing attraction to Sarah. It wasn't just her beauty, though she was undeniably beautiful. It was the way she listened, the way she understood my pain, the way she made me feel less alone. I could see it in her eyes too, a flicker of something more than friendship. There was a connection between us, forged in the crucible of shared suffering. It was both exhilarating and terrifying. After dinner, we decided to take a walk. The night was cool and clear, the city lights casting a soft glow over the streets. We strolled in silence for a while, the unspoken tension between us growing with each step. Finally, we reached a small park and sat down on a bench. The silence stretched on, heavy with unspoken words. I turned to Sarah, my heart pounding. Sarah, I don't know how to say this, I began, my voice trembling, but I feel something for you. I know it's as complicated, and maybe it's as just the situation we are in, but I can't deny it. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a mix of surprise and something else, something that mirrored my own feelings. Mike, I feel it too, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't expect this, but here we are. Before I could second-guess myself, I leaned in and kissed her. It was a tentative kiss, filled with the uncertainty of our situation. But as our lips met, I felt a surge of emotion, a release of all the pain and frustration that had been building inside me. The kiss deepened, and for a moment, everything else faded away. There was no betrayal, no lies, no broken marriages, just the two of us, finding solace in each other's arms. We ended up back at her place, unable to resist the pull between us. It was a night of passion and desperation, a way to forget the pain and find some measure of comfort in each other. As we lay together afterward, the weight of what we had done settled over us. This changes everything, Sarah said quietly, her fingers tracing patterns on my chest. I know, I replied, my voice heavy with regret. But it doesn't change how I feel about Lisa and Richard. We still need to confront them. Agreed, she said, her tone resolute. But what happened between us? It stays between us. We can let this complicate things even further. I nodded, knowing she was right. We'll deal with them first. Then we'll figure out what comes next. We swore to keep our night together a secret, to focus on the task at hand. But as I left Sarah S.'s apartment and walked home, I couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get even more complicated. The lines between right and wrong, loyalty and betrayal, had blurred beyond recognition. The next few days were a whirlwind of emotions. Lisa and I continued our strained routine, each interaction tinged with the knowledge of what I had seen and what I had done. I could sense her growing tension, but she remained oblivious to the alliance I had formed with Sarah. Finally, the day of the confrontation arrived. Sarah and I had arranged to meet Lisa and Richard at the same restaurant where I had first seen them together. As I prepared to leave, my heart pounded with a mix of fear and determination. This was it, the moment of truth, and no matter the outcome, there would be no turning back. The weight of what Sarah and I had done hung over me like a dark cloud. The secret felt like a betrayal of my own principles, a step too far in the tangled web of deception and pain. As much as I wanted to keep it hidden, to protect Sarah and myself from further complication, I knew I couldn't live with the lie. I couldn't be like Lisa, hiding the truth behind a mask of normalcy. The morning after our night together, I decided to tell Lisa everything. She deserved to know the truth, and I needed to come clean. The confrontation with her and Richard was looming, and I couldn't face it with this new betrayal hanging over me. "Lisa, we need to talk," I said, my voice trembling as I approached her in the kitchen. She looked up from her coffee, her eyes filled with a mix of curiosity and concern. "What is it, Mike?" I took a deep breath, gathering my courage. "I haven't been honest with you. There is something you need to know." Her expression shifted to one of apprehension. "What do you mean?" I sat down across from her, my hands shaking. "I saw you with Richard at the restaurant a few weeks ago. I confronted you about it, but I couldn't let it go. I met with Sarah, and we decided to work together to find out the truth." Lisa's face paled, but she didn't interrupt. She just stared at me, waiting for me to continue. "As we spent time together, Sarah and I grew closer," I continued, my voice cracking. "We ended up sleeping together. It was a mistake, but it happened. I couldn't keep it from you." The silence that followed was deafening. Lisa's eyes filled with tears, and she looked away, struggling to process what I had just told her. "Why, Mike?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "Why did you do it?" "I don't know," I admitted, my own tears starting to fall. "I was hurt and confused. I felt betrayed by you and Richard, and I found comfort in Sarah. But that's no excuse. I'm sorry, Lisa. I'm so sorry." She wiped her tears away, taking a deep breath. "I need to tell you something too," she said, her voice steadier now. "You're right. There is something between Richard and me. It started out as a professional relationship, but it became more. I'm sorry, Mike. I never meant for it to happen, but it did." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Even though I had suspected it, hearing it confirmed was a different kind of pain. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, my voice raw. "I was scared," she admitted. "Scared of losing you, scared of facing the truth. I thought I could keep it hidden, that it would go away. But it didn't, and now everything's a mess." We sat in silence, the weight of our confessions hanging between us. There was no anger, no shouting, just a deep, aching sadness. "What do we do now?" I asked finally, my voice barely above a whisper. Lisa looked at me, her eyes filled with a mix of sorrow and resignation. "Maybe it's time we face the reality of our situation. Maybe it's time we let go." The words hung in the air, the finality of them sinking in. It was a painful truth, but a necessary one. We had both made mistakes, both betrayed each other in ways that couldn't be undone. Holding on would only cause more pain. "You're right," I said, my heart breaking with each word. "It is time to let go." Over the next few days, we began the difficult process of untangling our lives. We sat down and talked about the practicalities dividing our belongings, discussing the future, and how to move forward separately. It was heartbreaking, but there was a strange sense of relief in finally facing the truth. One evening, as we were packing up our things, Lisa turned to me with a sad smile. "You know, maybe things had to go wrong for us to find where we really belong." I looked at her, my heart heavy with regret and understanding. "Maybe you're right," I said softly. "Maybe this is the only way forward." We decided to meet with Richard and Sarah together, to lay everything out in the open. It was a tense and emotional confrontation, but it was necessary. We all needed to face the consequences of our actions. When we met at the restaurant, the atmosphere was charged with a mix of anger, hurt, and resignation. Richard and Sarah were seated at a table, their expressions wary as we approached. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. Richard nodded, his face serious. "Yes, we do." We sat down, and for a moment no one spoke. The weight of everything that had happened hung over us, a silent testament to our collective mistakes. "Mike told me about you and Sarah," Lisa began, her voice calm but firm. "And I told him about us, Richard. It's time we stop hiding and face the truth." Richard looked at her, his eyes filled with regret. "I never wanted it to come to this," he said quietly. "But you're right. We need to be honest." The conversation that followed was painful and raw. We laid everything out, our betrayals, our regrets, and the broken pieces of our relationships. It was cathartic in a way, a necessary release of all the emotions we had been holding back. In the end, we all agreed that it was time to move on. Lisa and Richard decided to pursue their relationship openly, while Sarah and I chose to take a step back and reevaluate what we wanted. As we left the restaurant, Sarah walked up to me, her eyes filled with a mix of sadness and hope. "I am sorry for everything, Mike," she said softly. "I never meant for any of this to happen." "Neither did I replied, my heart heavy. "But maybe it is for the best. Maybe this is our chance to start over." She nodded, and for a moment we just stood there, two people bound by a shared history of pain and betrayal. As I walked away, I felt a strange sense of closure. The truth had come out, and while it had shattered our lives, it had also freed us from the lies and deceit. It was time to rebuild, to find a new path forward. And though the future was uncertain, one thing was clear: we had faced the truth, and now it was time to heal.